Good morning, Baltimore. It is Thursday, July 9th, and thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the Early Birds podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weyrich, alongside Ravens reporter Sam Cohn. Sam, we thought it'd be a little bit before we saw each other, but it's actually been 48 hours since we last recorded, so good to see you again, buddy.
Great to see you. Thankfully, you did not have to wait any longer than that. This is best case scenario.
Exactly. I'm coming at you guys from the Camden Yards parking lot as the No radio booths available today for me to jump into. So jumped out
I'm
of
in the
the
comfort
ballpark.
of my own home now.
You're at home. Wow. Just soaking up the last 3 weeks of offseason for you. This training camp is 3 weeks away, 3 weeks as of yesterday, Wednesday. And we're going to do some big questions facing the Ravens as they approach training camp, some lingering things from the offseason, but also expectations and things that have to be decided heading into the year. And then on the back half of the show, we'll do an MLB draft preview. The Orioles have the number 7 overall pick, highest draft pick that they have had for any draft since taking Jackson Holliday at the top of the 2022 draft. First time they drafted number 7 overall since taking Nick Markakis back in 2003. That one worked out pretty well. So we'll talk about a couple of guys that have been mocked to them at that number 7 spot ahead of Saturday's first round. But first, Sam, Ravens training camp 3 weeks away. Are you soaking up the last bit of offseason you have here?
Yeah, just trying to make the most of it, trying to do as little as possible on the days where I'm afforded that right. So yeah, it's been nice. Do we want to just brush over the fact that USA was embarrassed by Belgium on the national stage 4-1, or should we just kind of we set up ourselves the last 2 weeks as we're getting into it during the World Cup podcast as we talk about Ravens and Orioles. So I don't know if you want to close the book on that, or if you have another team you're rooting for the rest of the way. Where do you stand?
I stand that now that USA is out, I can stop caring about the World Cup because I'm not a soccer fan. And really, not that I didn't enjoy watching Team USA throughout this run. There were a lot of fun moments that, got you excited and things like that. But at the end of the day, soccer just doesn't really get me going like that. So, it does feel like same old Team USA where we beat the teams we were supposed to beat and lost to the ones that were actually good.
Can't play with the heavy hitters.
Yeah, maybe there's some momentum that can change that next time, but at that point, that'll be 4 years from now, so we'll find out around then.
I'm going to be 30 when we get there, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Think about your life in terms of the World Cup, which I guess is the same as thinking about your life in terms of like a presidency, but it's very strange. You're kind of aging yourself. I was rooting for, I thought, well, there's no way USA is going further than if they beat Belgium. They're certainly losing to Spain. In the, I guess the equivalent of the Elite Eight, the round of 8. But I held on to Portugal for a moment there, thinking I just spent time in Portugal. I got to watch a game out there. Like that'll be my adopted team, and that didn't last long either. So, yeah, I mean, I like you. I think when you have a vested rooted interest, it's fun to watch, but without Team USA, and you lose a little bit of that spark, but the World Cup is still, there's so much talent. The best teams are going to play. Like it's still fun to watch those games come down the stretch and as we said, all the heavy hitters. But we have other more pressing local things to talk about. So.
Yeah, and it's funny because once Team USA lost, the most common tweet I was seeing on the timeline was, well, Team USA is now XX days until training camp starts. That's just where Americans are turning their sports fandom forward, particularly in Baltimore, where the Orioles haven't exactly commanded the fans' attention so far this year, with their loss on Wednesday night dropping them to the same record that they had at this point last year, same record through 92 games. So not a whole lot of inspiring baseball being played, but the optimism of training camp is approaching for the Ravens. So we wanted to go through 5 of the biggest questions facing the team with training camp 3 weeks away. And Sam, sorry, we'll jump right into it here. Freudian slip there. The biggest story of the offseason was Trey Hendrickson, and can he make good on this contract they gave him, 4 years, $112 million, especially considering that they backed out of Max Crosby to sign him?
Yeah, I mean, start with the fact that you mentioned Max Crosby, and I know we mentioned this a lot during the height of that whole saga, but as we've said, everything that Trey Hendrickson does this year is going to be compared to what Max Crosby does in Las Vegas. If the Ravens aren't as good as they should be, the fan base will spend so much time, and we as reporters will spend a lot of time comparing how well he's doing there with a fire under his butt and thinking about, what maybe what could have been in Baltimore. But if Trey Hendrickson does live up to that 4-year, $112 million contract, if he is everything that they say he is, which to be specific, Jesse Minter has said that the reason they got him, and he said this several times, is because they want a closer. They want a guy who can come in on third down and get a sack and get their defense off the field, or who can make a play and get their defense off the field. So we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about Max Crosby, even though he's not on the Ravens. But the Ravens are really going to hope that Trey Hendrickson is exactly what they paid a lot of money to get him for, which again is to be that closer and to be the guy who can lead the defense in sacks. I do think there's real weight behind the argument that Jesse Minter's defense could be beneficial for Trey. He's coming off season-ending core muscle surgery. He played 7 games in 2025. He in years past has shown like he can be a double-digit sack plus 15 plus sacks year over year. He can be a real difference maker. That was in Cincinnati. This is the first time he's coming into a new defense, new scheme, new guys around him. It'll be interesting to see. And now he's obviously very much the guy in Baltimore, the guy they're really going to lean on and count on, both as a leader and also someone who can produce sacks. So based on, and I know we've talked about this before, but like it's the most classic, obvious Baltimore coded example is what Jesse Minter was able to get out of Odafe Oweh. And that instance, in Jesse Minter's own words, was, he felt like scheme, it made sense, but just as much like Odafe Oweh kind of had something to prove. He had a fire lit under his butt to go to LA and to show that he can be a guy who can warrant a lot of money. And Trey Hendrickson probably feels some of that too, less about the money and more so that a lot of people know that the Ravens almost got Max Crosby, and he was sort of the consolation prize. There's probably part of Trey that maybe won't verbalize it, but really wants to show that the Ravens made the right decision in Trey Hendrickson. So I think that Jesse Minter certainly there's weight to say that his scheme could be beneficial, just because we've seen the success that he's had as a defensive guru in the past. But I still think there are concerns about how much he'll be able to do, particularly in the run defense. And just to kind of wrap on it there, like I think the question is whether Trey can do the things that he's done so well for the past few years, and can the rest of the defense kind of mask those other issues? And that sort of opens another can of worms on that topic of Trey about looking at that defensive front. Like, can he get enough help elsewhere that having an aging Trey Hendrickson, who maybe is a half a step slower than he was before, or isn't quite getting to the quarterback in the way he has been, but still gives you a lot. Can you mask some of those other issues to still have a really effective defensive front, which any of that would be a lot better than what they did last year?
My confidence in Trey Hendrickson coming into 2026 is high. He is somebody who pre-injury was still at the top of his game. I get only 4 sacks in 7 games. It's not a crazy number, but certainly 17 and a half sacks each of the previous 2 years, and playing in a defense that over the past 3 seasons is arguably the worst in the NFL. I mean, they rank 25th or worse each of the past 3 years in total yards allowed per game. And, none of that the fault of Hendrickson, who, was an all-pro player in 2024. The question for me is will he be able to produce through the end of this contract, a 4-year deal, going to take him through into his mid 30s, you would say. And, what the track record of an edge rusher being able to remain productive to that point. Not everyone can be a Calais Campbell who does it for so long deep into their career. So is Hendrickson a good bet to be able to do that coming off of a surgery? Maybe not, but as far as what it does for their chances of having a better defense in 2026, I like the addition. I like what he brings to this defense, the closing aspect, as you said, the ability to help stop, get to the quarterback is something that they have just sorely lacked. And, if Nnamdi Madubuike is able to, come back and be a force on this defensive line, this group really does have the potential to be the best in the AFC North and maybe one of the best in the league when it's all said and done. So it's a revamped group with Jesse Minter obviously coming in and now calling the shots and getting a fresh look at things. But I like what Trey Hendrickson is going to be able to do in 2026, and my expectations for him, even coming off of surgery and being 32 years old, are still as high as they've been for the last few years.
What'll be fun to watch is, I think, Trey Hendrickson's ability. Obviously, there's a lot of like intrinsic motivation to be the best Trey Hendrickson he can be, but a lot of his success will be dependent on some of the guys around him and how other guys within that defensive front are able to kind of free up lanes for him. We saw that was a big part of the reason Nnamdi Madubuike had so much success, and then we saw the reason that he was garnering double teams, and then Odafe Owe was able to get a double-digit sack season, and Kyle Van Noy was too, because Nnamdi was getting so much attention. So he'll need someone else to garner that attention, and we anticipate a year two jump from Mike Green, but be interested to see how Kyle Hamilton fits into that equation. As we watch this defense, when Malachi Starks and Jalen Hawkins are your two safety set, and Kyle Hamilton is roaming and playing closer to the line of scrimmage and deployed in funky ways on that defensive front, how does maybe they have Nnamdi Madubuike available this season, and maybe Calais Campbell is exactly what they need, and maybe Travis Jones is exactly what they need, and maybe Mike Green takes that year two jump, and that is everything on the Ravens wish list, this defensive front. But Kyle Hamilton is another name that will be really, really helpful to a guy like Trey Hendrickson, and for the Ravens to get the most out of him, because he is someone who unexpectedly or out of the norm of a normal defensive front will get a lot of attention when he's playing closer to the line of scrimmage. Just another all-pro for them for an offensive line and offense to think about in a game plan for.
Yeah, I mean, the secondary struggles as a whole last year contributed to the low number of sack totals. There's no doubt about it. That group took a step back in 2025 and was just as important and just as crucial to the reasons that they took a step back defensively as the defensive front's shortcomings as well. So they saw that in Cincinnati, where, that secondary, it was been pretty bad for years, especially since Jesse Bates left. Talk about a guy who from that second level is really important to that defense. And you're still seeing Trey Hendrickson racking up the sack totals that he was having, even with not necessarily having a true number two edge rusher on the opposite side for him. So he is somebody who can win double teams, who can take advantage and be someone who sucks up multiple parts of the offensive line to create lanes for other guys. It's just going to be a question of which of these guys that the Ravens have are able to step up and fill that role. They have a lot of candidates, a lot of guys with upside. We just haven't really seen it yet from several of these guys. Particularly with Zion Young and Mike Green as being the two guys that they're hopeful can kind of take leaps here early in their careers. But for Trey Hendrickson, he is a stabilizing force in a lot of ways. He's a veteran presence for a very young group. So I think he's going to do a lot of the things that the Ravens brought him in to do, both defensively and in the locker room, but also just being somebody that offenses have to pay attention to as an element that they clearly missed last year, having that kind of star player on that D line. It's just something that completely changes an offensive line's game plan and something that you have to account for. So even if the high sack total isn't there, I think his presence alone is going to open up opportunities for guys to take a step forward. And that's just so important with the young group that they have around him.
Matt, off the top of my head, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if any listeners have other answers to this, please let us know. I think Trey Hendrickson's ceiling, the delta between what his ceiling can be this year, what his floor can be, might be a larger gap than pretty much anyone else in this defense. You could maybe say the same about someone like Marlon Humphrey. You could maybe say the same about Calais Campbell. Has a high ceiling, but I don't think it's anywhere near, his ceiling to floor is not what Trey's can be. I guess Nnamdi probably would be the other one that would have a really, really high ceiling and a really low floor if he's just straight up unable to play. But of guys who, as of right now, we know are going to be on the field as long as they're healthy for the season, Trey Hendrickson could be a 17 sack guy for them this year, which would be tie the Ravens record. It'd be one of the great, that might be a Ravens record. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but anyway, it'd be one of the greatest performances. 17 sacks would be one of the greatest performances by an edge rusher that the Ravens have ever seen. Or at his age, coming off surgery, coming off a season in which he only played 7 games, he could be a total nothing burger. But I think I lean more with you that there should be a decent amount of confidence in him to be good. I don't think we've seen enough right now to say confidently he's going to have 17 sacks. But yeah, I'm with you that there should be some level of confidence in what he's able to do.
All right, the number 2 question on our list here, and something that is going to be a narrative throughout training camp. Will Lamar Jackson sign an extension before the season? He has 2 years left on his contract with an $84.35 million cap hit for next season. So certainly a restructure is going to happen no matter what you would expect for the Ravens. But is there going to be an extension this this summer, or are we going to be waiting and kind of going through this again with Lamar next offseason heading into his walk year?
I lean the latter, and I'm also going to say really quickly, I fact-checked myself because I was pretty sure I was right, but I didn't want to say too confidently before I fact-checked myself. Elvis Dumervil, 2014, 17 sacks, so that would tie the Ravens record. Lamar Jackson extension, I think that to think it's going to happen now feels silly just because it makes more sense for Lamar, who is his own agent, has always kind of done things his own way, to wait until next year. For one, by then, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams will all be eligible for new deals. Those are all guys on rookie contracts who are going to set the market. We just saw Patrick Mahomes tack on 2 years for $1 bajillion on his current deal. More specifically, it's $64 million per year, and I think his total valuation of his contract is $500 million, which is just ludicrous. I think it makes more sense for Lamar to wait until some of those other guys are re-signing and to be a part of that pool of making a lot of money next offseason. And then on top of that, I think for someone like Lamar, who has been very active and very present with this current staff, with this new staff, and getting acclimated to how things are working, I think if you're Lamar, you might just say, let's wait till next offseason. Let's see how this year goes. And as confident as he might be right now in where the staff can go, he might feel either more or less confident after one season actually playing football games with the staff, seeing how Declan Doyle is calling plays, seeing what Jesse Minter's like when things get hard or when things are going well. So I just think it benefits Lamar most to say, let's wait till next offseason. I think a lot of the reporting out there has said that, they're in a great space, both organization and QB1. It probably just makes more sense they wait until next year to have a bit clearer understanding of their future as an organization and a quarterback. And for him, it just makes more sense to see how to see where the quarterback market goes next offseason.
Yeah, my understanding from the reports that we've seen about this situation is that the Ravens are ready to talk, that they're kind of patiently waiting on Lamar, and it's up to him.
They've said as much.
Table. Yeah. So it's really up to Lamar now of when he's ready. And coming off of the season that he had when he missed time to injury and maybe wasn't as elite a quarterback in terms of the pure numbers as he was the year prior when he was snubbed from MVP, for Lamar, he might want to be coming off a better year and look at this season as an opportunity to prop himself up even further. I also do wonder, what if the injuries strike again and you have a back-to-back plague seasons and all of a sudden are the Ravens showing more pause? Or do you not maybe return to the heights of being an all-pro level quarterback and maybe to take a step back in the run game? Not that I expect that to necessarily happen for Lamar Jackson. I think right now he is this inner circle, one of the best quarterbacks in the game, and the Ravens are going to treat him as such in negotiations right now. I'm not sure how much leverage he gets by waiting a year. Now, waiting a year, like you said, there's the Jaden Daniels and the Caleb Williams and the Drake Mays of the world. Those guys are going to be due for extensions, and at that point, maybe you can set yourself up for a greater payday with them. But I wonder how much of a difference it's going to be when the market is already kind of set, and Lamar Jackson is a part of the reason why it's set where it is right now. But with what we're seeing for Patrick Mahomes going forward, he could fight to be in that neighborhood and certainly would be deserving of that. I don't know that he gains much by waiting a year, but obviously with him representing himself and not having an agent, this has always kind of gone to Lamar's tune in a bit of an unorthodox way. So as far as my expectations, I agree. I think that he will wait until next year to really kind of dig his teeth into these kind of talks for a long-term deal. But I do wonder if it might be prudent for him to get out ahead of it. And maybe it just comes down to comfort. Does he want to feel out a season with Jesse Minter and Declan Doyle before tying himself to his organization long term? I could understand that. I could completely understand that if that is maybe one of the driving factors for him. But since we don't know what the driving factors are and we're just kind of left to guess, I do wonder that if waiting a year could actually end up hurting him in the long run.
Yeah, I would imagine he's comfortable being patient, but to that point about yes, obviously it's possible he has another injury-plagued year, and I don't want to say his stock goes down because we're all well aware of how amazing of a quarterback he is, but history has said that he doesn't kind of have this 2 years in a row. I think he comes back and does the thing that Lamar has done so well, which is come off injury and be great again and especially we're going to get to the offense more specifically in a minute, but I think there's a lot of excitement from him so far about what he'll be able to do in this offense. And I think if he has a healthy year, I'd be hard pressed to say that he doesn't have that kind of season that would warrant a lot of money come next offseason. So it's a fool's errand at this point to try to get inside Lamar's head. It's something that he won't talk about. It's a question that he'll laugh when it's asked because there's an understanding between quarterback and reporter that it's just not something he's going to touch publicly at this point until it happens. So I think we're on the same page here that probably it seems like it's going to happen. It's just probably not going to happen soon.
Yeah. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the game, and there is no doubt in my mind that when healthy, he is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the game. So certainly you can understand why he'd be confident in himself and bet on himself. It's worked in the past before, and that's why I kind of agree with you that this is probably the most likely path that he's going to take here. You alluded to this, but next question here. What will the Ravens look like under Jesse Minter and his coaching staff, and particularly the offense with Declan Doyle coming in as a first-time play caller? We have kind of an understanding of the type of offense that he is going to run after working under both Ben Johnson and Sean Payton. But Sam, what is just kind of your expectations for the style of play we are going to see as far as what is Ravens football in 2026?
Yeah, so things we have to go off of as of now. Obviously, so much of this becomes a lot more clear in about 3 weeks, but so we have prior tape to go off of coming out of the Ben Johnson tree. We have a little bit of those padless practices to see what some of those plays might look or feel like as they're doing a lot of installs in first in OTAs and then in mandatory minicamp, and we can kind of see these guys on the field and see some of that coaching, and then just going off what they're saying. And I know I've made this point on this podcast before and in other places too, that it just like it feels so earnest when these guys talk about how excited they are about the offense, specifically about what Declan Doyle is able to do, and we've had those conversations about how they call him a genius, and how Zay Flowers has said that he's trying stuff that Zay Flowers never even seen, never even thought of. Declan Doyle's running plays you've never even heard of. So I think there's a genuine excitement coming within the building about what this offense can be. What we know so far, I think it's absolutely fair to expect Lamar to unfurl that ball more than he has in past years. I wrote about it at one point last year, kind of going back, like Lamar had talked about when Todd Monken took over, that he was ready to kind of step into a place in his career where he was running the ball voluntarily less, and he was ready to throw the ball more. And it was something that he showed when he was healthy. He put that on tape, and the stats showed like he was running a lot less. He didn't run. I think his only rush of 20 plus yards came in week 18, if I'm remembering correctly. Like he was not really running the ball a lot last year. Obviously, some of that has to do with lingering injury issues, but for the most part, like, he was looking to pass the ball more. And I remember asking Snoop Huntley about this when I was working on that story last year, and he was like, he's just like that's Lamar trying to do what he's done his whole career, which is show that he can be that great of a quarterback by throwing the ball. And I think we're going to see a lot of that again this year. The biggest highlight play of minicamp and OTAs was Lamar chucking it downfield, maybe 35, 40 yards to Elijah Surratt on a back shoulder throw. So I think it's fair to expect some of that, to see, Declan Doyle has talked a lot about chasing explosive plays, wanting to go for these big plays. I think that's, one of the primary pillars of a Declan Doyle offense is chasing those kinds of explosive plays. I think they'll find ways to manipulate defenses with the read option in kind of creative ways. 2 years ago, when the Ravens had one of the best offenses in the NFL, so much of what they were good at was utilizing Lamar and Derrick Henry and making it really difficult for defensive linemen, linebackers, and defensive coordinators to game plan for, like, where is the ball going at any given moment, because you have two guys who are Hall of Famers with the ball in their hands. If Lamar can kind of turn around and use some misdirection and make defenses question where the ball might be going, that's really going to play into their strength. It was something they didn't use a lot or weren't great at last year, but it was something they were excellent at 2 years ago. And Lamar told that story about he was running, he takes a snap, he turns around, he was supposed to fake the pitch to Derrick Henry, but he did pitch it to him, and Declan Doyle cussed him out for it. and he loved the coaching. It was great, whatever. But I think you're going to see some of that kind of manipulation and read option and just them getting a little bit creative in what they're able to do with that. And then the other thing I'll say is, for their sake, we're hoping that the Ravens are willing to do a little bit more than just give Zay Flowers the ball in the passing game. Derrick Henry was top 3 in rushing yards each of the past 3 seasons. I think it's fair to expect he's going to get a decent workload. It's fair to expect he's, you'd be hard pressed to bet against Derrick Henry still being at the top of his game. But your hope, if you're a Ravens fan, is can they lean on more than just Zay Flowers? And that's one of the biggest questions. And I think that Declan Doyle's propensity to utilize multiple tight ends and get the most out of other tight ends might translate to other receivers who maybe haven't had that kind of workload to really fit into this offense. And if Declan Doyle is everything that they say he is, then he can probably get the most out of someone like an ascendant Tez Walker, who they all say is going to be awesome this year, who can get the most out of Mark Andrews coming off a contract extension, and who can find a way to get Elijah Surratt, Jacoby Lane, both really involved in this offense and hopefully find a role, a consistent, valuable role for Rashad Bateman. Because if Declan Doyle can do for some of those receivers what he's been able to do for second and third string tight ends in the past, this Ravens offense could be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. And, we've seen at times Lamar unfurl it and go, try out his receivers down the sidelines and things like that. And I think some of it has been personnel, some of it has been play calling in the way that they've approached the offensive side of the ball. But if this is going to be an iteration of a Lamar Jackson offense where he is throwing the ball deep down the field and you have to, as a defense, game plan for that, I have to get excited about what Derrick Henry could do with an open box like that. If you have to honor the sidelines and cover deep, you're going to leave all of these running lanes for Derrick Henry. And when he gets a full head of steam and makes contact at the second level, I mean, that's where his yak comes from, is being able to shake off those kinds of tackles and be able to barrel through guys and add a couple of extra yards after contact every time. I mean, that's Derrick Henry football. So it's funny because you talk about explosive and you talk about deep plays down the field, and Derrick Henry is not the kind of player that you think maybe fits into that mold. You want some pass catching back who can swing out to the outside and make plays in open space. That's not what Derrick Henry is. But to have both of these elements where you're able to beat teams two different ways is what Whoops, sorry guys, some technical difficulties there. My laptop overheated. So those of you watching on YouTube can see right now that my background has changed. I'm now sitting where Craig Albanese does his pre and post game press conferences as we try to keep this engine going. Obviously, we're just talking about Derrick Henry and the element that the Declan Doyle offense and the explosiveness can bring, and with his kind of bruiser attitude to it, certainly is an exciting prospect of what the Ravens offense can look like here with Declan Doyle, who has the human computer mind, as we've talked about, and bringing some new wrinkles and things that guys in this offense have never seen before. So what that looks like, whether it's a lot of motions, whether it's lots of plays to get Zay Flowers in open space, things like that, we will see. But next question, Sam. Oh, sorry,
Matt, first, let me just say I really hope Craig Albanese left a water bottle in there, or maybe a napkin or something. He had to go fetch, and he comes back in while we're recording the pod, and he just totally interrupts and sits down next to you. That's my hope. But I'm glad you're in a comfy place, and here he comes, Craig Albanese. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I do actually have to move over. Sorry.
Great.
This is no, you're fine. Got some folks coming in. Want to take some pictures. All right. Sorry
this
about that.
This is the beauty of live television.
Yes. Had some fans come in, and where did my cord go? Oh, no. What a disaster here today. Some fans were taking some pictures. They were doing a tour with the team historian, Bill Stecca, great guy.
Nice.
Bringing some fans in here.
Any takes they want to give about the Ravens or the Orioles?
They did not. It was like a young kid wanting a photo in Craig Albanese's seat, so I had to vacate for a second.
He wanted a photo with the Early Birds podcast?
Yes, I was the main attraction for them coming in. Where were we? Did the Ravens do enough to revamp their offensive line? That is the question I want to know about, Sam. I need you to talk about it. Please spare me from this disaster that has been the last 20 minutes.
Such a good question, Matt. I'm really glad you asked because I think the short answer, maybe the obvious answer, is no. Will we feel different in a month? Perhaps, but you're in the middle of the line, anchoring that offensive line. You're going from an All-Pro who spent years building a rapport and a relationship with Lamar Jackson, and was really strong for them the last few years. Having that consistency in an offense, especially when you have so much turnover, if there was a world where they had that consistency, that would have been huge for them. But you're going from Tyler Linderbaum, again, an All-Pro center, to as of right now, a career-long backup. The thinking is that Danny Pinter, who comes from Indianapolis, is sort of the front runner in that group. We don't super know. A lot of that competition is going to start and in earnest come training camp, and you're probably looking at a competition of Danny Pinter, Jovan Gwynn, and Corey Bullock. With surely Nick Dawkins will get some reps in there too, but it's a three horse race. But based on OTAs and mandatory minicamp, Danny Pinter seems to be the leader in the clubhouse. So did they do enough in that respect? No, they didn't draft a center as a lot of us thought they might. And then I think the more interesting one, and I should acknowledge by the time this comes out, I have a story about Danny Pinter going up in the morning from a conversation that him and I had a couple weeks ago at minicamp. So I invite you and encourage you to go check that out. But I think the more interesting conversation about this offensive line, and let's assume that Ronnie Stanley is healthy and the great left tackle they've had for years, and that Roger Rosengarten, who took a little bit of a step back in year 2, kind of comes back into form, and you feel good about him at right tackle. I think the guard position is interesting because obviously Faalele and Andrew Voorhees, Daniel Faalele and Andrew Voorhees were punching bag for the fan base, for the vocal parts of the fan base on social media. And I think no matter how you spin it, Vanga Ioane, John Simpson, and Emory Jones, some duo of those three is an upgrade from those two. I don't know if it's as much as an upgrade as some are making it out to be at this point. Like, I think there's maybe an overconfidence that they're going to be that much better. I do think they're going to be better. The fact that Voorhees is sort of gone down the totem pole in terms of the reps that he's taking in mandatory minicamp and where we're seeing him line up speaks to the fact they have more confidence in some of those other guys. I mean, we did see Emory Jones take reps at right tackle just to kind of move him around, and I think that was also because Ronnie Stanley was not practicing, so maybe when you move Roger and then you put in Emory, backfill with Emory and give him some of those reps. But you're going to look at two guards among those three. John Simpson was not very good last year. He was much better the year prior. Emory Jones hasn't played meaningful football, and there is an expectation that Vanga Ioane comes in and is pretty good right away. So if nothing else, I think it's important to have confidence. It's fair to have confidence, I should say, in Dwayne Ledford. He was one of the biggest coaching staff additions, one of the most highly touted offensive line coaches in the league, coming from Atlanta. So I think what he'll be able to do with this group certainly merit to that conversation. I think that this group is going to be better than they were last year. I'm not sure, especially at that guard position, that they're going to be that much better, particularly early on, because you have one guy coming off a down year, two guys who have not played much meaningful NFL football at that position, and you're protecting a multi-million-dollar two-time MVP quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that Lamar Jackson is as equipped to run away from sacks as any quarterback in football is certainly a nice cushion for this offensive line, and maybe a reason that they haven't gone all in on bolstering it as maybe we thought they did. I mean, a couple of months ago, I went on this pod and said I was really confident they were going to go out and get another center, and ultimately it does not look like that is going to be the case. Danny Pinter seems to be the leader for that position, but obviously is going to be a bit of a competition in camp, and they're putting a lot of faith in Vanga Ioane to step in and be that guy right away, a new rock for this group. You've got an aging Ronnie Stanley, who I think you can still rely on to be a star left tackle. Certainly at this stage of his career, he's not necessarily shown a lot of signs of taking that step back where you start to really worry that he's starting to lose it. And Rosengarten, we've seen him do it before, so there's reasons to be excited about that. But this just group as a whole, it's not as rock solid as you would like it to be to protect your most valuable asset in Lamar Jackson, and certainly is one that they're going to have to kind of feel out. And one or two big injuries to this group, and we're really starting to talk about it being a weakness of this roster.
Yeah, you touched on it there, and I think it's worth acknowledging up front, like no offensive line is going to have five guys who are all unbelievable. I think, maybe that Eagles offensive line 2 years ago is one of the closer examples, but there are a lot of good teams that don't have five guys who are all studs on the offensive line. And if but as you said, like if they don't have a lot of room for someone to get injured, I think right now if you have enough confidence in Emory Jones, and obviously there was a lot of confidence coming from inside the Ravens organization about why, they drafted him in the third round, not this past draft, but last year. So clearly they see something in him. He's coming off injury, basically had a redshirt rookie year, and hopefully I think they hope that he can contribute in some meaningful way. Bringing in a veteran and a familiar face in John Simpson, certainly again that familiarity there might help, and having a veteran in the room when your other two guards are two guys who are both ostensibly rookies. And then of course Venga Ioane, I think you put in our notes here, he has to be an immediate hit, and that's exactly right. Like if this offensive line is going to be good enough for the Ravens to make a run, Venga Ioane is probably at the top of the list of like, you're not positive what you're getting, but needs to outperform, needs to be exactly what you drafted him for. He needs to play like a first round pick, bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you put significant resources to get him on the team. So you like what you see in him. He certainly has the traits to be that guy, but you never know until a player like that gets out on the field. So we'll see what that looks like as he gets going in training camp. Certainly a player that we're going to be having a lot of eyes on as camp gets going. And Sam, that kind of leads into our last question here. The Ravens went out and addressed a lot of key holes in their roster through the draft. They go obviously and get Ioane in the first round, but Zion Young to pad the edge rusher group. They go over and get a new punter through the draft. They go and get another couple of receivers to bolster that room. How much of an impact can this rookie class make on this Ravens team in 2026, and how much can they afford to rely on a group like that?
I think you have to be able to rely on them at least a little, but I don't think any of these guys are going to be superstar difference makers. I think when you look at last year with Malachi Starks and Mike Green, there was almost more weight on them. And Venga Ioane certainly holds a lot of that pressure of like, they had a high first round pick. They had a top half first round pick. He has to be able to come in and make a difference right away. But I think it was almost more pressure on your two guys last year with, Mike Green. The expectations were high that they drafted a guy in the second round and everyone said he's a first round talent. How quickly can he be someone who looks like a first round edge rush talent? And Malachi Starks was the cerebral rookie safety who they drafted because, and as we saw, like he's really smart and he has a high ceiling. So I almost think there was more pressure on kind of the top part of that draft class last year than this year. And I say that just because obviously you kind of need a lot out of Venga Ioane, but Zion Young, there's a little bit more flexibility for how good he needs to be so quickly. I think because you bring in Trey Hendrickson and because you have Mike Green, who's expected to take a year two leap, like there's a little bit less pressure on that second round pick. And then they go 4 pass catchers. And not all 4 are going to be, or I should say 4 pass catching kind of positions, because they go 2 receivers and 2 tight ends, but thinking, I think, is that one of those tight ends winds up being a little bit more of a blocking tight end. So I think that maybe 2 of them are probably going to be able to meaningfully contribute in some way in 2026. And the question is, which 2? And I kind of think it's anybody's game right now. I know I have in our notes, I think that's more likely, and I know we've talked about this before, that Elijah Surratt might find more of a role in year 1 as opposed to Jacoby Lane, just because Elijah Surratt could wind up in some kind of special teams role. But I think long term, Jacoby Lane has a little bit higher of an upside as a receiver. So as we talked about with Declan Doyle's offense, it'll be interesting to see which of those guys finds a role, because, and I should acknowledge that Jesse Minter had said something to the effect of, it's likely, and their hope is they can get a lot out of at least one of them this year, if not both. But the expectation is that one of them can contribute. And then Matt Hibner and Josh Cuevas, the 2 tight ends. Obviously, you have Mark Andrews at the front of that room. You're backfilling the losses of Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kohler. Can one of them contribute in the passing game? But, we mentioned before, too, with Declan Doyle, what he was able to do with the tight end room and getting funky kind of schematically. can he do something similar with those two guys, or at least one of them, to be able to try different things, to be able to try different personnel and two tight end sets, etc. So I think from that standpoint, you need contributions. You are not so heavily reliant on this rookie class to be able to get to the promised land that is the Super Bowl. And then the other one that we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on, and you mentioned him briefly a moment ago, was Ryan Eckley, the punter. You don't have an all-pro punter anymore in Jordan Stout, but Ryan Eckley can't be a net negative. Like, he has to be at least a 0 on his plus minus. Like, he has to be able to give you something. He can't hurt you. If we're not really talking about Ryan Eckley in 2 to 3 months, then he's doing a good job. He needs to either exceed expectations or be just good enough that no one notices he's there. And in some respects, that was kind of Tyler Loop for most of his rookie year, obviously until week 18. But he was not put in crazy situations. He was hitting the kicks he needed to, and he was doing enough that no one was ever really super worried about it until it came down to the fact that he had to hit the big one. If you can avoid putting, and obviously a field goal kicker, a place kicker has far more responsibility than a punter, but this organization values special teams more than most, certainly understands the responsibility of a punter and the ability of special teamers. He needs to be a net 0 or above for this team this year if he's going to really contribute to what they need, because it's kind of their only option.
Yeah, certainly a group with a lot of upside, and one that was graded pretty well by evaluators, other than the fact that they didn't go out and get a center. So you look at this Ravens team right now, and there's certainly going to be, we had a whole episode talking about the veterans they're going to be relying on, but they're relying on a lot of young guys too. So we'll see what this group is capable of here as training camp gets going, and we get a better idea of who might be winning some of those competitions, particularly with an eye on that receiver room. Let's go ahead and switch gears, talk some Orioles draft. All right, folks, we have changed venues here for the third time here on this chaotic episode. Our apologies. Tried to record with Sam in the car outside of Camden Yards. My laptop overheats. I run inside, go into the press conference room, and then people start coming in there. It was just getting a little too hectic, and I wasn't able to find another quiet place before the game started. So unfortunately, it wasn't able to finish the show with Sam, but I am back on with you guys here to preview the MLB draft, specifically the Orioles selection at the number 7 overall spot. And it's the highest, as we mentioned at the top of the show, since 2022, when they had the 1-1 pick and took Jackson Holliday. Number 7, a historic pick for the Orioles, going all the way back to 2003 when they took Nick Markakis. So certainly some good juju there. It's not where the Orioles thought they would be drafting, obviously, in 2026, with where they thought they'd be in the competitive window. But this is part of the fallout from missing the playoffs in 2025. The Orioles are finding themselves near the top of this draft with a premium selection, with several top guys who could fall to them or be available to them. Certainly, there is in this draft kind of a top 6 players headlined by Rock Chalosky, the college shortstop out of UCLA, who's kind of been the consensus 1-1 for most of this draft cycle. Maybe high school shortstop out of Texas, Grady Emerson, could go over him. Scouts have started to look at him as maybe being the best overall player in this draft, but obviously a high school guy, maybe a little bit more risk, being a guy who is going to take a little bit longer to get to the major leagues. But neither of those two are expected to be available to the Orioles at number 7. As I said, a bit of a top 6 here. So I'm going to look at 2 guys that have been most commonly mocked to the Orioles at this number 7 spot. And the first one here being Drew Burress, outfielder out of Georgia Tech, listed at 21 years old, 5'9" and 185 pounds. He's a bit undersized, obviously, by his stature, but still some pretty good power numbers. At a school record 60 home runs over 3 seasons at Georgia Tech, and good plate discipline too. Walked more times than he struck out. It's 160 walks to 122 strikeouts. In the outfield, he's got a pretty good arm, might be able to stick in center field, but even if he does move over to the corners, profiles as a potential plus glove there at both the corner spots. Overall, there's questions about what kind of upside he might have, but maybe a safer pick. But at the same time, there's no weakness really in his game. By the 2080 scouting scale, a guy who is at the 50-55 mark across the board from both Baseball America and MLB Pipeline. So some consensus on him being a pretty solid player across the board. The Orioles have a history, obviously, of really liking college hitters at the top of the draft. I mean, just since Mike Elias took over as the Orioles general manager ahead of the 2019 draft, college hitters they've selected in the first round. Irish, Aloy, Bodine, Honeycutt, O'Farrell, Bradfield, Beavers, Cowser, Kerstad, Westberg, Rushman. Pretty much all of their picks actually being college bats. Obviously some infielders, catchers is in there as well, in addition to outfielders, but they've really honed in on the college bats, and it was kind of emblematic of them being at the top of the farm system rankings and what their farm system was built around, and now their major league roster having a lot of young talent, the young core, as gets thrown around about being predominantly built around position players. Part of that is drafting guys who are from college and projectable, and that seems to be what their preference is. So Burris, kind of a guy who is, like I said, commonly mocked to them at number 7, not in that necessarily that top 6 consensus group in terms of these strict rankings of players, best players in the draft, kind of on the outside of that. So more of someone who profiles well to the Orioles based on their draft history, but certainly somebody who could potentially move quickly through their system and help them at the back end of this competitive window. We will see, obviously, these things take time, and for players like Vance Honeycutt and Griff O'Farrell, guys we're still waiting on to see if they're ever going to reach their potential. Heston Kjerstad has still not done it at the major league level. These guys are not necessarily locks to be hits or anything like that, of course, but it'd be interesting to see if they got another guy in there like Drew Burris who kind of fits that mold. They certainly have proven that they've been able to get guys like that to the major leagues with a track record of, your Dylan Beavers, your Colton Cowsers, Jordan Westbergs, Adley Rushmans, whatever you might look at. Ike Irish, who is going to be in the Futures game this year, having a great start to his professional career. So up and down, they've had a lot of success with that type of molded player, and certainly would not be surprised, even with Will Robertson, their new draft director, taking over this year. It would not be a surprise to see them go with Burris, the guy who really just checks off a lot of boxes that players they usually draft at this point of the draft. And it's funny because Vance Honeycutt was kind of viewed the same way in that he checked off a lot of boxes and was the guy most commonly mocked to them a little bit farther in the first round and had some obvious flaws in his game. But overall, the profile was one that really fit the Orioles, and everyone mocked him to Baltimore, and of course they end up drafting him. Maybe we see the same thing here with Burris, who is more of a complete player and better prospect than Honeycutt was, certainly somebody who would have a chance to be a top 100 prospect right away, depending on, how he kind of finishes out the year, if he makes his professional debut and how he looks. But somebody who is certainly going to be on a lot of teams' radars, whether the Orioles take him at 7 or not. I keep mentioning this top 6 here, so let's look at another player who's in that group and maybe if he falls. And we've seen over the years lots of teams try to employ the signing under slot strategy, and maybe they don't go for one of the top names on the board. They go a little bit farther down to try and sign somebody to a below slot deal so they can use some of that money to sign somebody else later on in the draft to give them a big bonus. So lure them away from a college commitment, what have you. So if one of these guys falls, the most commonly one that gets mocked to the Orioles is Eric Booth Jr. Now, he's a high schooler out of Oak Grove High School in Mississippi. He's 18 years old, 6 feet tall, and 207 pounds. He's committed to Vanderbilt right now, but you'd have to think if he's going in as a top 10 pick, he's going to forego that commitment. Left-handed hitter as opposed to right-handed for Burris. He has elite speed, 80 grade by Baseball America, and potential 20, 25 homer power, who hits to all fields. He's the son of Eric Booth Sr., who was a running back and kick returner at Southern Miss, and also a 34th round pick of the Toronto Blue Jays in 1993. So certainly some good genes there that he has to work with. And scouts have written a lot about his swing and how it's a little bit weird, a little bit of a unique stance. He holds his hands pretty far away from his body, which kind of results in this awkward swing path that has been a little bit more slappy than power dependent. So he's moved his hands a little bit closer to his body as he's kind of progressed. But that's something certainly I think a lot of teams will look at and say, we're going to have to change this if we want to be able to tap into that power potential. Maybe more of a project than Burris, for that reason alone, but the upside is there for him to be an all-star. He's the number one outfielder ranked in this class consensus, with Burris being the number one college outfielder, kind of right behind him. But for Booth, there's certainly more upside with him. The speed is undeniable, certainly can stick in center field. Maybe the arm doesn't end up being, a standout tool. But at the same time, if he can make up for it with the speed, he certainly has the tool to be in center field. And if you can get that kind of 20, 25 homer pop from him down the line with the way he might be able to steal bases and hit at the top of the order, you're talking about potential all-star player. And is that the potential for Drew Burris? It's certainly within the realm of possibility for him, but somebody that maybe is a little bit tougher to project reaching the heights that Booth has. And that's why he's a consensus top 6 player in this class, and somebody who, despite the Orioles track record, they might have a hard time of not being able to turn a ticket in to draft him because of those tantalizing tools. And they do have, some exceptions to that rule. They drafted Slater DeBrun last year with one of their first round picks, ultimately trading him to the Tampa Bay Rays in the Shane Baz deal over the offseason, as well as Jackson Holliday, who was a high school player at the time and not really the consensus guy at the top of that draft. The Orioles kind of went out on a limb to take him with that 1-1 pick. So certainly, they haven't been afraid to take the right guy when it comes to high school players. And I could certainly see Booth being a guy that they'd be willing to maybe not take Burris and go for him instead if he's still on the board, just looking at that upside. And, no team really drafts on need in baseball. It's, a lot. You talk about a football draft and, teams will say we take the best player available. That's really not true in the NFL, but in baseball, unless there is a clear need for your overall farm system that you just desperately have to address, you're more often than not just going to take the best player that you have on your board, because whether they make it through the farm system and eventually be a star for your team, or you trade them as a prospect one way or the other, you don't know what your team is going to look like, what your needs are going to be over the next few years. Injuries happen, things like that. So with Booth there versus Burris, I'd have to think they would probably take Booth over Burris, but maybe the front office says, how long are we going to be here? Would we rather have a guy in Burris who could get there faster and help the major league squad? I don't know that that's going to enter the calculus. Certainly they wouldn't say that if it was, but at the same time, an interesting decision if Booth does drop to them and both are on the board, which way they go, their usual route, or if they decide to take the more higher upside pick instead. A couple other names to know here. One is Jackson Flora, right-handed pitcher out of UC Santa Barbara. And it's like, whoa, we're talking about a pitcher, the Orioles, first round. It's never happened, at least under Mike Elias. The last pitcher they drafted in the first round was Grayson Rodriguez, who obviously was drafted before the new regime took over, or the current regime, I should say, took over. But Flora is a part of that top 6, a consensus top guy in this draft. And if he falls to them at number 7 and Booth is taken, it's like, maybe they are willing to go away from that mold a little bit and take who is the consensus top pitching prospect in this draft, somebody who is very projectable, and obviously being from the college ranks a little bit more refined and built to move more quickly through the farm system. And also, it's funny because the narrative around the Orioles has been like, oh, they just never draft pitchers. They've had so many position players. You look at their farm system right now, and it's kind of all pitchers. I mean, we see Joseph Jurwa and JT Quinn, the top 2 pitchers that they drafted in last year's draft, both with second-round picks, with Jurwa being the highest drafted pitcher in the Mike Elias era. Both are off to great starts. They had a ton of pitching prospects that they got at the trade deadline last year that now have kind of filled out this system. They have your Esteban Mejias, who's down, in low ball, but certainly somebody who they have high hopes for down the line. Trey Gibson is their consensus top pitching prospect, in guy who's bounced back and forth between AAA and the majors this year. Luis De Leon, the list goes on of guys who are maybe knocking on the door of the major leagues in the next year or so. On the position player side, they don't really have a whole lot of prospects who are really knocking down the door. I mean, Enrique Bradfield Jr., their first round pick from 2024, is in AAA and maybe could be the next guy, but they don't have a lot of room at the major league level for a lot of these guys these days because of all of the players that they've promoted and also signed in free agency to fill out that roster. The need really is on the pitching side, and that's where the opportunities are for their current starters. And you can never have too much pitching. So I don't know that, the number of pitchers that they have in their farm system is going to preclude them from taking a guy like Flora, who I think they would be pretty surprised to see to them at number 7. But certainly they could use the bat in Drew Burris or Eric Booth Jr., both of whom could fill a void that has kind of been left now ever since the graduations of Samuel Basayo and Dylan Beavers, 2 of the kind of consensus top 100 guys. At the time they were added to the 40-man or added to the active roster, I should say. Since then, there really haven't been any standout guys in this farm system. Ike Irish maybe being the one who was drafted just last year, who you can say, okay, he's on the fast track to the majors. So what this team decides to do at the draft, it's going to be interesting. Not as many picks this year compared to last year when they had some comp picks and things like that that worked out in their favor. They traded one of their comp picks actually to the Rays in the Shane Baz trade as well. So they don't have one of those selections. So not going to be a very active draft, but having this pick at number 7 puts them in the driver's seat to get at least one blue chip prospect for their farm system. And it'll be interesting to see how they use their bonuses. They've been creative with it before. We've seen them on multiple years use their bonus money to their advantage. Slater DeBrun is an example of a guy that they signed over slot a little bit later in the first round, kind of basically getting themselves an extra top first round pick, as he was, I believe, the consensus top prep outfielder in the draft that year. So what the Orioles decide to do should be interesting to see, but the draft starts at 1:00 on Saturday. The broadcast kind of bounces around between a few different channels. I know it starts on NBC and Peacock and then goes over to Dolby Network, but their pick will probably be around the 1:30 to 2:00 time range for the Orioles. If you want to tune in there, certainly we'll have a ton of draft coverage. Jacob and I have been prepping for this all week. Ton of stuff going up over at BaltimoreSun.com, so be sure to follow along over there. For Sam Cohn, I'm Matt Weyrich. I want to thank you all so much for listening to today's show, and apologies again for the craziness that has been episode 43 of the Early Birds podcast. Not one that we expected it to go the way it did, but we got it through. We got a full episode on some Ravens, some Orioles. Thrilled for that. Training camp coming up. It's exciting times for the Ravens, and certainly with the Orioles and the way they are playing right now, as I am recording here after watching them lose their 3rd straight game and second in a row against the Cubs in what was a homer-filled outing for both teams, really. It is certainly, while maybe not the way Orioles fans are hoping it can go, it is a product that you just quite simply can't look away from. All right, y'all. Thank y'all so much for listening again. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Give us 5 stars on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And give us a follow over at Sun Early Birds on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.